Hello, I'm Esther Gidhu-Ewart. It's Tuesday, March 29th. This is Africa 54.
Tuesday's peace talks between Ukraine and Russia reveal a possible ray of hope towards peace. The Africa Development Bank plans a $1 billion emergency food production initiative to avoid a food crisis on the continent triggered by the Ukraine conflict. And the director of the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention sheds light on the significance of the public health agency becoming autonomous.
We begin with new developments on the war in Ukraine following Tuesday's peace talks in Istanbul between Ukraine and Russia. There appears to be a ray of hope toward a major pause in the conflict. Russia is promising to substantially scale down its military operations around the Ukrainian capital Kyiv and the northern city of Chernihiv, while Ukraine is proposing to adopt a neutral status, but with international guarantees to protect it from attack. If this happens, it could be the most significant progress yet in peace negotiations between Ukraine and Russia, according to the Turkish foreign minister. Russia's lead negotiator, Vladimir Medinsky, says that Kyiv's proposals to Moscow includes one that Russia would not oppose Ukraine joining the European Union. The United Nations says that the Russian invasion of Ukraine has pushed at least 10 million people out of their homes and that more than 3.8 million have fled the country. Despite Tuesday's peace talks, Russia's airstrike and artillery barrage of Ukrainian cities goes on. A Russian rocket slammed into the regional administration building in the southern Ukrainian port city of Mykolaiv Tuesday, trapping 11 people under the rubble. According to the local governor, a large hole was blasted into the side of the building. Vitaly Kim says 3 military personnel were also trapped. Russian forces have attacked multiple Ukrainian southern ports, including Kherson, Odessa, and Mariupol, as they try to cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea and establish a land corridor from Russia to Crimea. Russia persists on calling its actions in Ukraine a special military operation to disarm and denazify its neighbor, and it denies targeting civilians. But Ukraine and the West say Russian President Vladimir Putin launched an unprovoked war. For more on the Russia-Ukraine peace talks, standing by via Skype from Warsaw is VOA's Eastern Europe chief, Miroslava Gongadze. Miro, thanks for joining us from Warsaw there. What are you hearing from political experts when it comes to these ongoing negotiations between Russia and Ukraine?
You know, this negotiation are, as you said, hopeful sign. However, both sides have a lot of questions to each other, and at this point, the Russians are expecting that Ukraine would draft written documents and propose to Russians. And the question of neutrality of Ukraine and not joining NATO, that was the major issue that Putin was raising during this war of aggression on Ukraine, is on the table. The experts in Ukraine are questioning this deal. They don't. A majority of them don't agree that Ukraine should surrender, because in this point it feels like Ukraine would surrender. Even Ukraine has at this point advantage because they are pushing Russian forces. Russia is kind of maybe accepting this deal because they really want to remain in Donbass and they want to remain in Ukraine. And Ukraine, as experts on the West and in Ukraine are saying, so Ukraine would have to basically forfeit some of its territory if that would be the case. So there are a lot of questions to this deal, and the question is how long this would actually even hold if the agreement would be made.
Do we know at this point what Vladimir Putin's stand is?
Not clear. The deal was kind of there were some offers. Russia actually withdraw some of their demands. They obviously wanted to crash Kiev, but today the negotiators said that they are not planning to go on Kiev, and as you said, they are trying to withdraw some of their forces from Kiev. So obviously they changed their tactics and they changed their goals at this point, because clearly they see that they cannot win and they cannot occupy Kiev. However, they are trying to focus on Donbass. They are still, as you said, keep shelling some of the south and the east cities. And actually, in some of the cities like Kherson, that's a southern city of Ukraine, they actually are becoming more aggressive toward local population. They're kidnapping, they're torture of local population, those who are standing up against aggression. So, at this moment, it's a very, very, very tight and difficult situation.
Miroslava, thank you very much for the update. Miroslava Gongadze is VOA's Eastern Europe chief. She joined us live via Skype from Warsaw. U.S. President Joe Biden's comments about Russian President Vladimir Putin not remaining in power have been clarified, but Biden is not backing down from the sentiment. However, the U.S. is not planning to take Putin out of office. VOA's Anita Powell reports from the White House on what this means.
After 3 days of lengthy meetings and delicate negotiations, firm agreements and fervent promises, it all came down to 9 words about Russian President Vladimir Putin.
For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power.
Back in Washington on Monday, Biden defiantly defended his words, but clarified his intent.
I'm not walking anything back. The fact of the matter is I was expressing the moral outrage I felt toward the way Putin is dealing in the actions of this man. Just brutality of half the children in Ukraine. I just come from being with those families. But I want to make it clear, I wasn't then, nor am I now, articulating a policy change. I was expressing the moral outrage that I feel, and I make no apologies for it.
But analysts say this is dangerous talk for American diplomacy.
This is really kind of confirming some of the worst suspicions of what the United States really wants in global affairs. I think in terms of the reactions from other countries around the world, the comment was unwelcome. We certainly saw a reaction from other European partners clarifying that the United States should not and cannot be using this kind of escalatory language. And so I think, unfortunately, the comment is one that is going to reverberate still for a number of days and weeks.
Biden, who said he was moved by Ukrainian refugees he met in Poland, stressed that he was not threatening Putin with regime change.
I was expressing my outrage. He shouldn't remain in power. Just like, bad people shouldn't continue to do bad things. But it doesn't mean we have a fundamental policy to do anything to take Putin down in any way.
American Enterprise Institute analyst Leon Aron, a keen follower of the Kremlin, says Putin is likely to shrug off such talk for now.
Putin is a big boy. Remember, he had been called a murderer, and then they smiled at each other and shook hands. So I believe that in the long run, I don't think it's going to hamper anything. Now, to say that he'll forget it, no, of course he won't. He will not forget it, and he will definitely try to get back at Biden in one way or another, whether rhetorically or in some sort of policy action. But for now, it's not a disaster.
Aron says Putin is unlikely to change course in this brutal conflict, now entering its 2nd month. On Monday, Russian state television aired what it said was the inside of a theater destroyed by a Russian bombing on March 16th in the southern city of Mariupol. Civilians sheltering there said they had tied a white flag to the top of the building and painted the word children in large white letters on the ground, visible from the air. Ukrainian officials estimate that about 300 people were killed in that strike. Anita Powell, VOA News, the White House.
The president of the Africa Development Bank says it is planning a $1 billion emergency food production initiative to avoid a food crisis on the continent triggered by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Africa 54 managing editor Vincent Makori has more.
Speaking to Reuters, Akinomi Adesina said the AFDB was planning to launch an emergency food production plan that would focus on rapidly boosting wheat, maize, rice and soybean output.
The plan is to be able to produce roughly 30 million metric tons of food, and to get technologies into the hands of 20 million farmers. So you're looking at big scale with smallholder farmers.
Like much of the world, African countries are facing rapidly rising consumer prices, with the war in Ukraine endangering global wheat and corn supplies and sending fuel prices soaring. Adesina said that follows the coronavirus pandemic, which had already pushed 24 million more people on the continent into extreme poverty.
When COVID struck, we were not ready. But this time, we are fully ready, and we will avert a food crisis, and we will avert also the impact on inflation. But we do need the money to be able to very quickly intervene and get it done.
Adesina decried the war's impact on Ukraine and its people, but also said it could be an opportunity for Africa. The continent could position itself as a natural gas supplier to Europe, he said, and a refuge for investors fleeing Russia.
There are a lot of investors that are going to be diversifying out of Russia, of course, right? And they want to diversify into whether it's energy, whether it's gas, whether it's into minerals and metal processing and beneficiation. That's a real opportunity, I think, for Africa at this point in time.
The International Monetary Fund had already voiced its support to help implement the plan, which will produce food staples worth $12 billion, according to Adesina. The AFDB plans to raise money for the initiative from various emergency support facilities, concessional financing, and from the IMF's proposed $50 billion Resilient Sustainability Fund. Vincent Makori, VOA News, Washington.
At least 7 people in Nigeria were killed Monday night and several are missing after suspected bandits attacked a passenger train bound for the northern city of Kaduna from Abuja, according to a passenger and a security source. The suspected bandits blew up rail tracks and exchanged fire with security officials aboard the train. Security forces say around 970 passengers were on board the train when gunmen started shooting into the coaches before the army arrived to repel them. The Democratic Republic of Congo has been admitted into the regional East African community, a bloc with a single market allowing free trade and movement of citizens. The EAC chairman, Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta, described it as a momentous time for the EAC, which is based in the Tanzanian town of Arusha, which now expands to 7 nations, including Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, South Sudan, and Uganda. Be sure to join us tomorrow for our technology report. Africa 54's Paul Ndiho speaks to a Nigerian-based entrepreneur about tech buzzwords. Still to come today, a VOA exclusive interview with a Ugandan author who fled the country after being charged with insulting the president. But first, Heidi Adams tells us what's coming up on Wednesday's Straight Talk Africa.
How worried should the world be about the Wagner mercenary group? Join me, Heidi Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa as we'll explore Russia's rising influence in the Sahel region. We'll also talk to the Prime Minister of Cote d'Ivoire about his plans to keep the peace and create jobs in his country. Plus, we'll introduce you to the new president of the U.S. African Development Foundation. All this and more on the next Straight Talk Africa.
A Ugandan court has issued an arrest warrant for Kakwenza Rukirabashaija, an award-winning author who fled the country after being charged with insulting President Yoweri Museveni and his son, General Muhoozi Kainerugaba. VOA's Paul Ndiho spoke to Kakwenza Rukirabashaija. Some of the images used in this interview are graphic. Viewer discretion is advised.
I don't know if such arrest warrant is international or whether it stops somewhere within the borders of Uganda. But I looked at it in disgust. First of all, the magistrate who issued it is being used by my tormentors, he's making a fool of himself by issuing such arrest warrants. When I applied for my passport that was in court's custody, the magistrate refused to give it to me. I decided to leave the country illegally. I'm getting medical attention I need.
The government of Uganda has denied that there was such a thing as you being tortured. In fact, one of my colleagues, Peter Clotty, who spoke to you right after you left the country, also spoke to President Yoweri Museveni about the torture claims, but the president denied those claims. He said that these were some rogue elements within the police force, within the security forces that perpetuate such crimes. Your reaction to that?
He's not the right person to be talking about torture right now because he knows that it takes place. Even my first arrest in 2020 April, when I was being tortured in CMI, I met him physically, he himself. You know, you saw my back, how it is, how they are using bludgeons to hit my ankles to the extent they fractured them. They used pliers to pick flesh from my thighs, whips to mutilate my body. So you can, what excuse do they have? Who tortured me? You should be asking them who tortured me because they picked me when I was very fine, physically fine.
There are people who say that, who, let's say, accuse you and say that, for example, you engaged in what a lot of people would characterize as a character assassination using the internet. You took it too far. That maybe because of that, you ended up finding yourself in this kind of situation. How do you respond to that?
My freedom of speech is inherent and is protected by the law, by the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda. There is no law that justifies torture, you know that. If they thought that what I did was offensive, they should have investigated, arrested me in a proper manner. And let me tell you something, when I was picked, I was not tortured because of the tweets I made. I was tortured because of my books. They wanted to know who is behind me, who sponsors my books.
As journalists, as writers, as authors, we have a responsibility to our audiences. My take on this would be perhaps that you use something more nuanced, not being so direct to the extent that it gets you in trouble.
Why should I expect any trouble because I've expressed myself? There's no one who can stop me from calling them whatever I want to call them.
I respect that. Thank you so much for your time.
I hope the interview is uncensored.
No, we'll air it.
It has been aired. That was VOA's Paul Ndiho speaking with Ugandan novelist Kakwenza Rukirabashaija. In a recent VOA exclusive interview with Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni, VOA's Peter Clotty asked the president about the allegations of torture in Uganda. Here is his response.
Mr. President, one of your critics made waves with claims of torture by the military, and that he has the scars to prove it. I think his name is Rukirabashaija and the likes. And they said they had known you to be against torture, but this is happening. So when you hear that, Mr. President, how do you respond to that?
It's true that some of the people were tortured. I have got some, I've not confirmed about that one, but I have confirmed some other cases. And I took it up with the, because you see, the part of the problem of Africa is knowing what to do, is capacity building. We are building armies and security forces, these come with, sometimes they come with traditional ideas from the village, or they get imported ideas from the former colonialists, like for instance, the police force, which was here during the colonial times. They were using those methods of torture to make people talk, to make what. But from the army, which is new, they come with the village ideas. In the villages, when you steal, you are beaten. They beat you for two reasons. First of all, to make you talk. The laws are there, but the sensitization, to tell them that, first of all, torture is not necessary. But there is also one problem, which is caused by the courts. The lawyers and the courts have been through Western type of education. So when you have these lawyers playing around, oh, this one, okay, he did, but the evidence is not enough, looking for, like, covering up the criminal, it annoys the security people. And also insulting people. There's what they call in the West free speech. That free speech, you can insult me. Then when you insult me, I don't know whether you can even go to court and you say so and so has insulted me. I don't know whether it is allowed. Defamation, yeah. You can go. Mm-hmm. Then when you go, he's given bail. Now our people are impatient with that. This man has, because in the village they fight. You insult me, we fight. So there should be some more, and those insults bring social disharmony. Africans don't like disharmony in the society. The elders would call you and say, stop this, stop that, and you would stop it. And if you don't for them, they would deal with you directly.
That was VOA's Peter Clotty speaking with Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni. A resolution was recently approved by the African Union to elevate the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention status to an autonomous health agency of the African Union. Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu spoke to the director of the Africa CDC, Dr. John Kengasong, about the significance of the public health agency becoming autonomous and his assessment of the current state of COVID-19 in Africa.
I think it's a remarkable advancement of the mandate of Africa CDCs. It makes it an autonomous health agency responsible for health issues on the continent. So that is the equivalent of what WHO is to the United Nations, which is a good thing for the continent because over the last 2 years, the political leadership of the continent, including the head of states, have actually seen the value in having their own public health agency. They have actually turned to the agency about 18 times to get advice on the pandemic. So it is a natural evolution from a specialized institution to a very broad-based public health agency. It allows for operational, managerial, and functional autonomy of the organization.
Let's talk about the coronavirus pandemic. Africa has recorded over 11 million cases of COVID-19, more than 2 years in the pandemic. How do you assess the situation currently?
The situation of the COVID-19 pandemic in Africa, as you stated, is where we are seeing a steady decline in the number of new cases over the last couple of weeks, which is good news. Most countries have now gone through the fourth wave, and some actually have gone through the fifth wave. But overall, we see that we peaked during the Omicron, and as a continent, it has declined significantly with almost 25% reduction over the last couple of weeks. But it doesn't mean COVID has gone away. We have seen this scenario like 4 times, where we see a peak and then we see a decrease and then we see another peak. My advice to the continent is that use this period of low transmission to reinforce uptake of vaccinations, to reinforce that we have public health measures, not necessarily lockdowns, but make sure that you open up the society in a more careful manner in order not to bring back a sharp rise in the number of cases.
Speaking of vaccine inequity has been a problem faced by the African region. Recently, in an interview, you spoke about asking that all COVID-19 vaccine donations for Africa be paused until the 3rd or 4th quarter of this year. Can you elaborate on that? Is vaccine supply no longer a challenge for the continent?
We are beginning to see a very steady supply of vaccines. So the supply side of the equation is good. But the demand side of the equation is where we should be focusing a lot on. And what I referred to in that interview in Politico was that we should more coordinate our donation efforts and then make sure that we sequence it over the 3 semesters and not to donate everything during the first quarter, and which will end up overwhelming countries to vaccinate as well as leading to expiration of doses. The focus now should be to support countries so that they can actually scale up uptake of vaccines. As we speak, only about 15% of the continent of Africa has received full doses of vaccines. That is 2 shots of the vaccines in case of those who are receiving double doses there. So if the target is to get to 70%, and the continent is at 15%, and then that tells you that you have a long way to go to get to that end point by the end of this year. We need more partnership. We need to be more strategic in the way we donate the vaccines on the continent.
We've seen that vaccine hesitancy has been a serious problem for the continent, and not just Africa, many places in the world. How do we engage the population, the communities?
We have to be innovative. And in several ways, we have mobile vaccination units that will bring them to schools, universities, marketplaces to convince people to vaccinate. It means we have to engage the community more deliberately and find champions like religious leaders. In our own experience, working with the MasterCard Foundation initiative that we launched several months ago, we've seen that if you engage religious leaders and other community leaders and civil society, your uptake of vaccines increase. I think we have to look at that. We have to look at the youthful population in the continent. Remember that 65% of the population of the continent of Africa is less than 25 years old. So it means that that segment of the population needs to be engaged in a very, very deliberate way so that we can increase uptake of vaccine. We cannot give up.
Dr. John Nkengasong, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your program.
That was Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu speaking to Dr. John Nkengasong, director of the Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Thank you for watching Africa 54.